morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode.
Working on OpenShift
and sometimes we haven't.
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
It's actually
in
a big
importance of
piece and a
transparency.
component for your GitOps work.
Everybody has something that they can say.
On top of the Red Hat portfolio. Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin live stream. This is our first stream of 2022, and Happy New Year, Johnny.
Hey, Happy New Year.
Yeah, it's good to see your lovely face, Stephanie as well behind the scenes. I know all of our viewers don't get to see her, but before and after you and I do, and it was great to finally kick things off.
Indeed.
So yeah, we had a conversation back before the holidays where we did our last stream of 2021, almost a month ago, and we were both like, well, taking PTO like in 2 days, and then we come back, and maybe we shouldn't do one the first week of January because there's basically no time in between. So apologies if anybody was expecting a stream last week. We took it a little easy. We got a little more organized, if you will, and we're ready to go for this year.
That's right. Refreshed, ready to go.
Yeah, as it were. As much as you can be in these rather interesting times, if you will. So I hope everybody had a safe holiday, most importantly, and hopefully folks are rested and relaxed. I know, Johnny, you and I, going back to when we were administrators, right? The holidays weren't always relaxing because that's when everybody else is off. So there was more than one occasion where it was, oh, this is when we get outage windows. Let's go.
Oh, yeah. Catch up time.
Yeah. So hello, everyone. Hello to our audience. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. So the Ask an OpenShift Admin live stream is a part of the Office Hours series of live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming. I know I just said live stream like 4 times there. So what that means is that we are here to answer any and all questions that you happen to have about OpenShift. We'll do our best to answer those here on the stream. If we can't, whether that's because we don't know or we can't get in touch and get responses from the right people during the stream, we'll follow up with you afterwards. And that can come in the form of maybe next week, where we talk about some things that we follow up on. We also have a blog that follows up each one of these streams. And I'm following up on getting all of those published coming up. We had a huge backlog on the blog going into the holidays and everything. So normally a change freeze. I hope so. A lot of times that seems to be 50-50 in my experience. Like some organizations have a freeze kind of towards, at least in the US here, right, towards the entire end of the year, because it's the holiday shopping season. It's also, particularly for healthcare companies, it's open enrollment. So they don't want to have all of that stuff potentially impacting business. So, and then on the other hand, you have, just normal, the government still functions and still does its thing up until the holidays actually happen. And then, people are gone. So it's an opportunity for the IT folks to do their stuff. So yeah, anytime, anything that's on y'all's mind, please don't hesitate to ask us in chat. Doesn't matter which platform you're asking us on. We'll see all those chat come through. The software that we use, it rebroadcasts, restreams, if you will, across all of the different platforms. That being said, we do have a topic with each stream that we do. We have a topic that we use to kind of focus or center, on things in the absence of your questions, if you will. But of course, don't let that limit your imagination. Anything that's on your mind, you can bring up regardless of what the topic happens to be. So let's see, Johnny. I'm gonna distract you for a minute. Did you have a good holiday? Did you do anything exciting?
Nothing exciting, no. But I did have a good holiday. Like we, my wife goes crazy. She's from the Midwest, and so like Christmas is like the holiday of holidays, and so she goes all out, and so the house is all insane, and it was good. We just had a good, nice, like quiet Christmas. How about you?
Yeah, same. My wife, so when I was a kid, we always traveled. We always went to my grandparents every year. And my wife, from the time that we had kids, she's been very staunch, very adamant about we will always do Christmas here at our house. So that's always been kind of a nice and relaxing thing. But I think I inherited a new hobby, or I've been told I am acquiring a new hobby. So one of my good friends, former coworker, he does Christmas lights, like goes all out all over his house and does the coordinated light shows and all that other stuff.
Oh yeah.
So this was the first time in 2 years that we'd seen his display, and since the last time, he has switched to all individually addressable LEDs. So his house is probably 15,000 plus of these lights, and it's this beautiful show. And my wife's like, "Oh, I really like that. Like, can we do that? Can you do that?" And like, I don't know about this. So
So did you
anyways,
do it?
no, no. I have known him for let's see, since 2013, and he's been doing it since then. And it is like some of the light shows that he does take years to build and all that. It is definitely. I was talking with somebody, like, as soon as he puts stuff away, he's planning for the following year, because like there's a whole group of people here in the RTP area. So they'll do like group buys of individual LEDs, and then he builds the displays and solders the LED. Like it's a crazy amount of work.
Yeah. See, I like I said before, right in the pre-show, I've got commitment issues. That's way too much commitment.
So I'll quit dilly dallying, and we'll quit with our small talk. But yeah, it was a good holiday, good relax, and all of that other stuff. So let's talk about this week's top of mind topics. So as you all know, this is kind of a reoccurring thing. Buy a Tesla. Yeah, it probably is. And you can use it to power the Christmas lights. So the top of mind topics are things that we have seen or that stick out to us as maybe being important to you all, from the last time that we happened to have had one of these streams, the last time that we happened to talk. So there's a few things that we have come across, and I actually haven't read through this list. It looks like we might have changed. So let's see here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is Log4Shell. So I hope everybody's heard of Log4Shell by now. So Log4Shell is the name for the vulnerability associated with Log4j, and it's basically executing arbitrary code inside of various components, right? Whatever happens to be using it for logging. So this one has been, continues to be a pretty significant thing. If you have not updated your clusters, I would strongly encourage you to do that. So there is a, what's the word I'm looking for here? CVE page that is available for that. I'll have to dig up the link. I forgot to link it in our notes document. So there is a CVE page that goes through and talks about how it impacts every version of OpenShift, as well as OpenShift components like the logging component, and when each one of those is patched. I see somebody asking about, would you guys happen to have any ideas for a project or something of the sort to learn Red Hat Enterprise with its trial for the first time? Yeah, Johnny, that's a good follow-up question. Are we talking about RHEL or OpenShift? So if you're talking about OpenShift, I always encourage folks to look at learn.openshift.com. That's a good place to start. You can also go to, depending on if you want to learn more about the application side, the developers landing spot. So developers.redhat.com. They have a lot of good stuff of, hey, how do I deploy an application, whether it's to RHEL or to OpenShift? So Log4Shell, definitely be cognizant of, be aware of, follow up on all of those CVEs. Let's see if we can find that CVE page real quick. CVE. Suppose I could share this screen. There we go. Oops, and now I lost my other window. Yeah, someday I will I will remember in Restream that the little cog is not the one to share my screen. It's let's see. Unable to share. What? What is going on here? That might not be good. I might not be able to share today. That'll be, I don't know that I need to share today, but that'll definitely make things interesting.
Are you not able to share it all?
No, it gave me a permissions error. That's strange. I don't know where that came from. Yeah. Huh. I'll have to figure out what's going on with that after the stream, so I won't dwell on it too much. I was just going to share the here. I will share the link instead. I was going to share the share my window that was reviewing the CVE, but it turns out that my sharing is not working.
Stephanie's saying try it again.
Yeah, too many tabs open.
Never.
No, please update system permissions. Oh well. Anyways, so I just posted the link to the security bulletin for that CVE as it relates. If you scroll down through there, you'll see the updates for affected products. You can see everything that's in there, including OpenShift 4. You can see the Hive container. So interesting note here. So I did some research after our last stream where we talked about this. So if you look in that security bulletin for Red Hat OpenShift 4, the first item in the middle column, the component that's affected, it says is Hive container. That is not related to Hive, the system that, we talked about Hive when we were talking about labs and, kind of non-production clusters. So Red Hat Hive or OpenShift Hive is a way of deploying clusters programmatically using basically Kubernetes constructs. The Hive container that this is referring to is a part of Apache Hive. Apache Hive is the component that's used for telemetry reporting within OpenShift. So all of the data that is collected and then sent up to insights as well as console.redhat.com and all of that. So that's what that's referring to. So if you saw, and there was some confusion even amongst myself, and that's why I started to really dig in. There was a lot of folks that were saying, oh, you just need to update the logging component. And if you don't have OpenShift logging deployed, then you should be fine. And then we released a set of errata that was, update to the latest OpenShift version, OpenShift 4.8. Whatever it was at the time. And folks were confused as to, well, do I need to update the whole OpenShift cluster in order to mitigate? And it turns out, yes, because that's how we do that update to the Apache Hive telemetry reporting component inside of there. And the reason for that is because it is that service, that component is controlled by the cluster version operator. And that was part of what spawned today's topic of, what is controlled by a cluster update or cluster upgrade. And when does it affect one versus the other, right? When is it a component update versus a cluster update? So we'll talk about that more when we get to the actual topic for today. But yeah, just be aware that if you haven't updated your OpenShift cluster in a month or so now is definitely a good time to do that, particularly if you have anything that is exposed publicly or anything like that. All right. Second thing that we want to talk about today. So we've been asked, or I've been asked, Johnny, I'm sure you've seen these questions come across a number of times as well, of is it possible to resize nodes in an OpenShift cluster? And nodes here is usually broken into two components. So one is control plane nodes and the other is compute nodes. And the answer is almost always yes, but the process to do that is different depending on the infrastructure and the type of deployment that you've done. So for example, if I have deployed with, say, AWS IPI, and I want to resize compute nodes, the most effective way to do that is going to be to create a new machine set or update the existing machine set to use the new node size, and then scale up with that machine set and scale down with the original machines. If I'm on premises, on the other hand, so maybe I'm using vSphere UPI, I have a couple of different options. So for example, with on-prem vSphere UPI, I can power off those nodes and then resize them. And that applies for both control plane and compute nodes. I can resize them and then power them back on and allow them to rejoin the cluster. So with UPI, or excuse me, IPI, and it gets a little gray with the cloud providers. The safest way to do it is going to be to basically fail the control plane node and then treat it like a disaster recovery of that node. So recover etcd and all that other stuff, let it rejoin the cluster. So one thing to note is that technically you can go in with, for example, vSphere or Rev or any of the other hypervisors and do a hot add, right? So I can go into vSphere, I can say I want to change you from 12 CPUs to 16 CPUs or 32 gigs of RAM to 64 or whatever. And if you go and look at the operating system, if you look at CoreOS, it will report the appropriate amount, right? It's just RHEL. RHEL has supported hot add for ages. I don't know how long. The problem is kubelet doesn't recognize that those resources have been added until kubelet is restarted. So the usefulness of that is somewhat limited. If I have a static pod configuration, right? So what I mean by that is, I've deployed workload across my node, and there's 10 pods, and one of those pods is consuming 90% of the resources. Let me add a bunch more resources, so that running workload would technically be able to consume those additional resources, assuming there is no limit in place or something like that. But the scheduler, because kubelet doesn't realize that more resources have been added, the scheduler wouldn't do anything with it, right? It wouldn't schedule more workloads, schedule more pods to that node. So the usefulness is a little bit limited in that respect. But it is possible to do hot add. Support is, well, I don't think it breaks support. If there's issues with that, it's not something we test as far as I know. So I don't know that, I don't know how helpful support would be. Johnny, any thoughts?
No, I typically what we're doing this in like a cloud environment, so AWS. So we'll just create a new machine config, or I'm sorry, a machine set, and then deploy that machine set to just update the hardware, and then kill the old one, scale down the old one.
Yeah, and there is it's not known, and I keep trying to share my window and it's not working. My own fault for not testing beforehand. So there is, in the documentation, you can explicitly tell it which nodes to scale down. So if you go in, I've got my machine set, I edit that machine set to change the, say it's AWS, change the instance type, and then scale that machine set up. You can tell it which nodes you want it to remove when you scale down. So you can either set a node attribute, or you can change the policy to delete the oldest nodes first. So I'll see if I can dig up a link to that at some point and include that. Okay.
And I don't know if we talked about this before, but that's probably my favorite feature of OpenShift 4 is the machine sets. Like that. That's back in the day, OpenShift 3, you're trying to add nodes to the cluster. That's like it was crapshoot. You didn't know if it was going to work. So I love the machine sets.
Yeah, I'm with you. Operators to me are really big though, because to me the most frustrating thing about OpenShift 3 was always the Ansible playbooks.
Yeah,
and I don't know about others, but it never worked right the first time. So like, I need to add a new node to the cluster. Okay, well, let me run the playbook, and something failed. Let me run it again, and something failed. Let me run it again.
Oh, it worked.
Yeah. So yeah, I really like, and it was a huge mindset shift for me. I joined Red Hat a little over 3 years ago, and 3.11 was out at that point in time, and I don't know what just happened. I'm going to hit cancel. Sorry, my browser just came up and was like, "Hey, you need to reload this site."
Like, no.
So I'm gonna not do that, so I don't lose my session here with the stream. But yeah, so the operators, it was a huge mindset shift when I first came on, and I first started right as we were doing the initial pre-release testing with 4.0, which 4.0 never saw the light of day. 4.1 was the first GA release, and I remember sitting here in the Raleigh Tower and being in the train the trainer training. Yeah. training. And like we're going through and learning about this wildly different paradigm, and I'm trying to change things the way that I was used to in OpenShift 3 of just modifying the object, and then the operator would come in and remove my edits, and it's, oh, what is going on here? Why are you doing this? And so it's I have to say, once I got used to it, it's been really, really nice. Updates and upgrades, perfect example.
Yeah. We had an issue with one of our customers where we were trying to modify DNS, and so we're like, oh, let's just go change resolve.conf, no big deal. And so we would change it, and then they start cycling through because the operator picks up and says, hey, you're wrong, and so it goes through its loop and it starts applying. It was pretty awesome.
So let's see. I have a question regarding operators and how they work with Kubernetes. After creating a controller using the operator SDK and deploying, what is actually happening under the hood? To put it another way, how does Kubernetes know that it has a new controller and I extend the functionality using the API extension API? So I will admit that this is not my area of expertise. So I will tell you my perspective, and then I will work with the folks on my team who are the experts on this, and we'll put some links into the follow-up blog post. I'll try and remember to bring it up next week too. So essentially, an operator is, when you deploy an operator, when you create an operator, it is roughly two things. So the first one is using custom resource definitions, right? So you are telling Kubernetes, hey, create this new API namespace or this new API endpoint. And when you get a request for that, send it over to here. And that here is the second part, which is that controller. That controller is nothing more than a pod that's deployed, or set of pods that's deployed into the cluster. So, hey, Kubernetes API server, create a new API endpoint. If anything hits that API endpoint, go over here and that thing will do whatever with it. So that is the operator itself, right? And that is not the same thing as the operand. The operand being whatever it is that the operator is managing. So the operator is, when I say, hey, create me, let's say I'm gonna create a new API endpoint for the object Johnny. Anytime I want to interact with, I need a new Johnny, I'm just going to create a new object of type Johnny, and it sends it over to the controller, and the controller does something with it. That something could be as simple as create a new deployment. It could be, and so just literally a standard Kubernetes, deployment object in whatever place it's supposed to create it in. Or it could be, much more complex. Hey, we need to request these, this other configuration object. The OpenShift logging operator is a good one. It uses the Elasticsearch operator, and it says, hey, Elasticsearch operator, give me an instance of Elasticsearch, and it deploys all of these other components and all of these other things, ranging from other CRDs to config maps, secrets, standalone pods, right? All that other stuff. So that's my 30-second definition. But like I said, I'll get a more authoritative answer and a more clear answer from the little experts that are on my team, and we'll be sure to share that. Johnny, anything from you on that?
No, you answered it way better than I would have.
So yeah, that was one of the hard things for me to wrap my head around. Is everything in Kubernetes, it basically all comes around to being the same set of things, right? Pods that are deployed via something like either standalone individual pods or via deployment or a replica set, config maps, secrets. It's just sometimes they're abstracted by things like an operator and the operand, those object instances. So I think OpenShift virtualization is another good example of that. Right, when I create a VM, right, I'm creating an object in the API named virtual machine, and that is nothing more than the definition of a VM. It's not creating anything at that point. When I go to power on that VM, the operator is actually creating a pod, and it's I think it's a Vert launcher pod, I think it's a Vert launcher pod, and that pod is the actual running VM, right? So it's one of those, like, depending on how you do it and what your actual goal is, it could be many different things. Just looking through chat just to make sure we didn't miss anything.
Yeah, I think I've kept up with it. Our Hope 9 said something about the delete policy in the machine set. It's important. Don't have it set to newest, which is what you touched on.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, our Hope 9. So the last thing I've got for today is just a kind of a general update. If you hadn't noticed, and this is something that normally I would show you, but I can't at the moment. So if you are doing Google or DuckDuckGo or Bing or whatever your search engine of choice is, if you're searching for things in the OpenShift documentation, you may have noticed historically you'll get random versions for things. Like you search for, say it's a persistent volume claim. And for a long time, I think it was like the OpenShift 3.4 documentation that was the first hit that came up. So obviously not terribly, maybe PVCs haven't changed that much since then. I would argue they have pretty significantly changed since then. But it's also very confusing, especially in the days of, OpenShift 4.789 to get documentation that's 3+ years old, 4 years old. Not terribly helpful. So the docs team has been working with our web team and the SEO folks and all of that of making a concerted effort to kind of de-index and end of life old documentation, that's no longer supported, no longer really, valuable. So that way we can hopefully improve those search results and make it much easier for everybody, myself included, to find that information. I will share a secret or a tip of you can go in with modern browsers. So I know this works with Chrome and Firefox for sure. I haven't tried it with Safari, but and along with all the Chromium derivatives and everything, but you can go in and you can create a custom search engine or a search string. So if you've ever used DuckDuckGo, they have the concept of they call them the what are they called? Like you can do !G, like bang G, and then your search term, and it'll search Google, or you can do bang B, and it'll search Bing and stuff like that. So you can create a custom search term. So you can do like, and what I do is create an OCP. So I do OCP space and then my term, and it will automatically search the OpenShift documentation. So it would be the same as doing in your search window, search term and then space site : http docs.openshift.com. So yeah, thank you for letting me know, Stephanie. There's something on the back end going on with the sharing, so we'll get that fixed for next week. But so yeah, I will share that process. I've got it in a gist somewhere, I think, because I shared it with my team a while ago. So I'll share that process for creating kind of a custom search term inside of your browser, so that way you can very quickly and easily search specific terms in specific versions of the documentation. Adding to my previous FIPS comment, search for KB titled Elasticsearch does not start when FIPS is enabled in OpenShift 4 before you update if you have FIPS enabled. Yes, thank you. And I noticed that the KCS search is back online. It was not working for a little while.
DNS. I don't know if it was DNS. I'll just.
What I heard was it was related to Log4Shell. So.
Oh man. Whoops.
Oh, they just disabled it to prevent issues.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So I use that all the time because I, type in search term and then limit it to just OpenShift, limit it to just KCS articles, and go from there. All right. Today's topic: updates and upgrades. And I said before, earlier that, I had started considering this topic previously just to talk about, the update upgrade process and all of that. And then Johnny, when we came back last week, you had mentioned that somebody had pinged you on, I think, LinkedIn with a question about that. So that kind of cemented, yes, we're going to make this a topic and we're going to talk about it, even though it is arguably something that we talk about, kind of all the time, right? It seems like every week we're talking about what's the newest release or the release status or upgrade status, from version X to version Y or whatever it happens to be. So what was the question?
Yeah. So the question was, it actually came from Carl Mosca, Mosca. But yeah, he reached out and he asked, with today's operator framework and the way that the clusters are deployed, why do we still have pet clusters instead of like cattle clusters, right? So why aren't we instead of doing updates, right, from 4.9 to 4.9.1 to 4.9.4 or whatever. Why aren't we just rolling into 4.9.4 as a brand new cluster instead of taking care of these things? And there, to me, there's a lot of reasons, especially coming from the DoD side, where like there's a lot of security teams that are very stuck on, like, you are 4.9.4 until the end of time, or until you recycle your SSP type things. And then there's some that are a little bit more lenient and they go the major release, so it's like 4.9, or the minor release rather. And a lot of it also comes down to, at least in my experience, has been resources. So we've been talking about, you get a VPC and you're very restricted within that VPC of what you can build and what you can't build and stuff like that. And so you're limited to the number of hosts that you can have. And so it comes down to just a resource constraint. It comes down to policy constraints, and all kinds of things. So when I was explaining this, I was like, Andrew probably has a much more eloquent way of explaining this than I probably do.
I don't know.
I feel like I'm the blue collar explanation.
I don't know about that. It's funny. When you brought up that question, it was one of those, like, I can see it both ways, of particularly if you're bought in on the whole 12-factor cloud native application thing. The underlying infrastructure is disposable. Why should I care about it? On the other hand, particularly for us admins, we love our clusters. We want to take care of them. We want to, and we don't do it intentionally, I don't think. It's just the way that we've always thought about things. And even when we're consciously trying to be better about treating individual components, as you said, as cattle. No offense to any cattle people out there. It can still be hard. So my first thought was, I think the majority of that decision of, do I upgrade a cluster or do I deploy a new one and move the applications, is really up to the application. No amount of us deploying new clusters and pointing to them and saying go use this instead is going to have any effect if the application team says, sorry, I can't. And there was a question yesterday. What was it? And somebody asked a question, and now I'm trying to remember what it was. And like the first response was, well, why would you want to do this? And there was the person responded, well, we have containers that are a single point of failure. And if it was doing live kernel patching. So what Oracle used to call what was that thing where you can patch the kernel without restarting the host? So they were asking if CoreOS supports that. And the first question was, well, why would you want to use that, right? It's RPM OS tree. It just flips over. It's a simple node reboot. You're good to go. And well, we can't take nodes down because we have containers that are a single point of failure, and there is no container live migration, so we have to keep the host up for as long as possible. So sometimes the application is the limitation. The best laid plans of admins and Kubernetes are sometimes foiled by those crafty applications. So that would be my first thought is to do the whole replace the cluster with a new one is pretty dependent on the application. The second thought is that is kind of a good idea, right? It gives you a hard, like, I am going to deploy whatever the next version is. I'm going to go through and do the validation testing, right? Everything on it. And then we have, like, you have this hard cutover between them so that you can kind of enforce that you're doing all of the proper testing. And hopefully you don't encounter any mystery issues or surprise issues, if you will, during that upgrade process. So I can see it both ways. There's a lot of reasons why it's definitely simpler and easier to do the upgrade process. Walk through it.
Yeah, we see a lot of times, especially in, like, when I was in consulting, where we do these things called container adoption journeys. Where you go out and you essentially from soup to start to finish, we teach people how to use build containers, use container platforms and stuff like that. And we generally recommend that we have like a dev test prod, so that way you can promote between, but it's so application specific, that it's all about promoting between those various levels. And then, but it's also a way for us to show that like, hey, here's how you also update your cluster without, without ever hitting prod, before anybody else sees it, right? You'll see it all up front. And then something that occurred to me just like earlier this morning is if you upgrade from like, say, a 4.8 to a 4.9 or a 4.9 to a 4.10 where there's API deprecations, that could be a huge problem if you're not expecting it and you're just blindly going from one to the next, so like you definitely want to test that stuff out.
Yeah. And I mean, you remember we had the stream on it, and I know that the internal mechanisms do the best that they can to warn you when those issues are going to happen. But they're not perfect. So, nothing, there's no panic quite like the panic of, oh no, I just broke something on accident, which is, I distinctly remember. It's been, close to 15 years now since I was a very junior VMware admin and accidentally unmounted the NFS data store and watched as all of my VMs were disappearing, and I didn't know why. And it's one of those, like, you have that sinking, oh no feeling, and knowing that you're going to spend the next several hours and hopefully not several days recovering from what was ultimately a silly mistake in my instance.
Those are life lessons though, right? Those are things that you remember forever. And so like next time you're doing something, you're like, let me check this thing.
Yeah. So let me catch up on chat here. So Waleed, we had issues with upgrading VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation, as the virtual hardware version for the VMs was version 15, while the QA environment was 14. So I think it was, I don't remember precisely when it was. We did recently, maybe it was with 4.9, but we did recently change the default version of virtual hardware from 13 to 15. The reason for that is because with CSI, we have to use at least virtual hardware version 15. And CSI will become mandatory in the future. Remember, the entry drivers are being, for lack of a better term, ejected from Kubernetes. And CSI requires that hardware version 15 or later, along with the static UID, which that was already set. I know I've mentioned it a couple of times before of if you have a long-running OpenShift cluster, one that was deployed pre 4.9, if you haven't already updated to virtual hardware version 15, now's the time to start doing that, because so we're expecting the Red Hat VMware CSI driver. So Red Hat will ship a VMware CSI driver. We're expecting that to GA with 4.10, and then it will become, I think, if I heard correctly, they will block updates to 4.11 if you don't have virtual hardware version 15 or later. So definitely before 4.11 ships, you'll want to make sure that all of that stuff is updated. Continuing your comment there, Waleed, management does not want us to update as frequently. What will you say to traditional management regarding update policy, and why would you advise frequent updates now that releases are 3 a year and not talking minor ones? Yeah, so this is one of those, it's an eternal and constant debate. I say that knowing that and seeing internally requests for, from customers of, hey, we know that OpenShift 3.11 support ends. When is it? This year, maybe?
This year, yeah.
Hey, can we continue to do that? And my thought, I have these alarms going off in my head going, OpenShift 3.11 is based on Kubernetes 1.11, and Kubernetes 1.11 is like 3 years old. So even if you're, and completely unsupported, or out of, it doesn't get any feature capability updates, anything like that, so it's basically security updates that are happening. So that to me, that's one of those, like, we know that customers are going to ask for that. We know that customers want to slow down the pace of updates, which is one of the reasons why I think Kubernetes went to the 3 instead of 4 annual releases. So my response to that is, you have to weigh risk versus benefit. So Going within minor versions, so minor version being the second number, so 4.6 to 4.7 to 4.8, I think is largely dependent on, because you have an 18-month window to do it now, how comfortable or when is the best opportunity to go between those. So 4.8 to 4.10, right, type of thing, maybe not do every single one. But you do have to be aware that there will be more change involved in each one of those. Going between Z streams, so 4.8 dot whatever, 4.9 dot whatever, 4.7 .z. Going in between Z streams, I always recommend folks update those, because that is where like all of the security updates, all of the minor ones, like all the log4shell update or security vulnerability patches, they were all a part of Z streams. So that kind of brings us to one of the points that we wanted to talk about with today's topic, which is what is the scope of change involved in an update versus an upgrade. So update is what I usually refer to as a Z-stream update. And upgrade is more like a minor version update. So Z-stream 4.8 or 4.9.8 to 4.9.12. Upgrade would be 4.8 dot whatever to 4.9 dot whatever. So from a process procedure standpoint, it's effectively the same. So let's take a step back or maybe a step down in the process. It's always triggered by a cluster version operator update. So the CVO has a huge manifest, or actually it's a list of manifests. That is all of the YAML objects representing all of the things that make up OpenShift. And that includes, things like deploy OLM, OLM now deploy this operator now deploy this operand, and that operand could be DNS, for example. So the CVO is kind of that source of authority. So when you go, whether it's from 4.7 to 4.8 or 4.8.z to 4.8.z plus 1, CVO is the first thing that gets updated. And it will apply that list of manifests and kind of let OLM and the other things do that. So the scope can vary. Some Z-stream updates or even major updates, upgrades, sorry, a Y release, 4.8 to 4.9 upgrade. That can be, some things will stay the same, right? So for example, maybe I'm going to pick on logging. Logging is one of the decoupled features. So the version may stay the same if you go from 4.8 to 4.9, even though other components are being updated. But it can also be larger than you'd expect. So for example, I think it was 4.7. One of the 4.7 Z streams, CoreOS rebased from like rel 8.3 to 8.4 or something like that. Might have been 4.6 and 8.2 to 8.3. I don't remember precisely. But, it was in a Z stream that we rebased CoreOS, from 8.3 to 8.4. Some people would consider that to be a pretty significant update. I tend to think of CoreOS as an appliance, so theoretically it shouldn't matter. But yeah, so the scope can vary. So why do we have a major, major, minor, 4.8 to 4.9? Usually those coincide with major API changes. So Johnny, as you highlighted, going from 4.8 to 4.9 meant going from Kubernetes 1.21 to 1.22, which included API changes, significant API changes, some of the most significant in recent memory. So yeah, that is usually, in my perspective, my anecdotal experience, it's the Kubernetes versions that trigger the 4.8, 4.9, 4.10, 4.11 updates. I don't think that was always true. I think there was one of the 3. something releases where that wasn't true. Because if the 3.x releases were a little less in sync with the Kubernetes releases, from what I remember, but I may be misremembering. Just catching up on chat here. Thank you, Stephanie, for linking the ultimate guide to updates. Waleed does not mention incentives clearly, like etcd data defrag. Yeah, unfortunately, the best way to find and understand those level of changes is to review the release notes. Yeah, it's tedious and kind of a pain. I guess if you're a better, reading learner versus listening learner, the what's new presentations that we do with each release should cover most of that. But we also don't know like what's important to you and what's not. So, Waleed, you mentioned the etcd data defrag. I would say that that's probably only really important to a pretty small number of folks, a pretty small number of clusters, because it only has a large effect, or you are only impacted if you had very large clusters, to the point where the normal defrag process just wasn't able to keep up. So previously the defrag happened every time you did a reboot. Now it happens on a schedule, regardless of whether a reboot happens. So, I don't know whether, that never impacted me, but I do, I know that others were impacted. So you kind of have to gauge based off of that. That's why we use vSAN, requires a higher VM version. Yeah, vSAN's, it's a good solution. I was just evaluating deploying it in our lab the other day. I didn't know that it had a VM version requirement, though. It's been a long time since I used vSAN. So does a cluster upgrade time vary per number of nodes? Yes. So not as much as before. And I don't remember what version it happened in. We talked about it here on the stream. So it used to be that every change was sequential. We would affect one node at a time. So they did, in one of the more recent releases, they changed it so that it affected up to, I think, 33% of the nodes at a time, maybe 10%. I don't remember.
Mhm.
I'll have to go back and dig it up, but it might be 10%. That sounds more like it. But so it will apply changes, particularly changes that don't require a reboot, to more nodes simultaneously, so that operator updates happen faster. The more nodes you have, like compute nodes, whether they're virtual or physical, the more nodes you have, then typically the longer it will take to do the last step in the upgrade, which is machine config operator. Because machine config operator will almost always do a reboot of each one of the nodes, because it's doing things, among other things, updating CoreOS inside of there. So how can you improve that time? The easiest way is to change the number of affected nodes for each one of those operations. So let me find that docs page. Johnny, I don't know if you might know the search term off the top of your head. So it is machine config. So
Off the top of my head. So
yeah, so in the MCP, the machine config pool, you have a setting called max unavailable, and I'm going to link. It is so this link is to the API documentation. So by default, it is set to 1. So what that means is that unless it's configured otherwise, with each machine config pool, it will only affect, or only one node at a time can be unavailable or not available for workload. So depending on your applications, depending on a number of other things, you can maybe increase that. Maybe you can go up to 2 or 5 or 10 nodes inside of that machine config pool that can be affected at any time. You can also use a percentage on that. So use 10% or 20% or whatever that happens to be. So this does. So even if you set that, so let's say that I had 10 machines in my machine config pool, and I set the max unaffected to 10. Right? Hey, take the whole thing down at the same time. It's fine. If there are things like a pod disruption budget set on your application, that would still limit the number of simultaneous nodes that can be affected. So it's a maximum, but not how many will always be affected, because there are other factors that can affect it. But that can pretty dramatically speed up things if it's an option. Hope 9, yeah, you were answering the same thing that I did. Did impact us a small cluster in the past. I was unaware of the scheduled one today. Waleed, happy to have you join. I feel like it's been a while since I saw you on here, so I'm very happy to see you again. Yep. So you decide how many nodes can be down at the same time. Thank you, Hope 9. Again, either a static number or a percentage based on how large that pool is. What time is it? Oh, we've got about 10 minutes. I can only go very slightly over today. I was telling Johnny beforehand that so in my office here, if I look up, the ceiling is still missing so from when we had the water leak before. So there's a person coming to look at that today. Hopefully we can get that resolved. But as a result, I do have only a short window to go over today. Kind of checking through our notes here. The updates or the release process. That was another thing I wanted to talk about. How did JP Dade, how did the Southern Maryland stuffed ham turn out? I lobbied my wife endlessly to try and get it done. She was not a fan. She was not on board. I even tried to get her parents on board, my in-laws. It unfortunately did not happen. So now I'm trying to see if I can do it on a smaller scale for Easter. We did end up going with a honey ham, so that we got from Costco or something. So
Nice.
Wasn't a complete loss. If you're on EUS versions, you can go up just by patching the control plane. While the node gets frozen, it will upgrade nodes directly. I think that will work. Our Hope 9. So effectively, you can. What our Hope 9 is saying is, with any OpenShift release, regardless of whether it's one of the even numbered EUS versions or not, you can basically pause updates or pause changes to a machine config pool. So you could manually pause that machine config pool, update the control plane, and then resume those updates. So I think that will work. I've honestly never tried that. And the result would be when that machine config pool comes out of its frozen status, it would say, oh, I'm on 4.7, the cluster's on 4.9. I just need to apply one set of updates. So that is functionality that is fully supported with 4.8 and later with the EOS releases. So starting with 4.8, you can go to 4.10 with that leap process. That's what I'm going to call it, or accelerated update process. But that only applies for compute nodes. The control plane nodes would still need to go sequentially 4.8, 4.9, 4.10. And then you would be able to do the same thing, 4.10 to 4.12, 12 to 14. Basic troubleshooting steps if a cluster upgrade gets stuck. So always look at whatever operators are not progressing and review their logs. So OC get CO, or if you look at the cluster operators page on the cluster, that'll tell you exactly where it is in the status, which ones are frozen. Sometimes it can be a little bit misleading. I just updated my lab cluster last week to 4.9.11. So from 4.9.8 to 4.9.11. And at one point it was telling me like, oh, the cluster update is failing because X is taking too long or something like that. And really I have no idea what timeout or what timer it uses to determine that. But really it was just one of those sit back and be patient. It was doing its thing. It was just taking longer than something expected. I don't know what that something was. I've got some notes here. I kind of the 3 different ways to update a cluster to trigger an update. So using the web console, using the CLI, and using GitOps. So I'll include that in the blog posts. That way you can see an example of how to do each one of those. GitOps is usually the one that most folks are the least familiar with. But yeah, you can actually do, if you do OC git cluster version, you can see the cluster object there. And effectively, you're just updating that, whether you're changing the channel. So say go from stable 4.8 to stable 4.9, or the specific release that you want to use. You can update that object and that will trigger a cluster update. And you can do that with GitOps as well as the CLI. So yeah, kind of jumping back just slightly, other basic troubleshooting steps. Johnny, anything that came to mind for you there?
The big one for me is check the logs. I mean, like, if you have the ability to go look at the console, make sure it's not stuck in a reboot or something like that. Make sure that like there's something, something dumb not happening, and if you can go and like force the reboot and kind of get it to kick back off, that might be worth doing. We see it sometimes in GovCloud where it'll reboot, and then sometimes the boot cycle takes so long that it stalls out. And so you can go and force the reboot again, and it'll just pick back up. Azure was the same way too. So
yeah, I'll say that in my lab, I have forcefully triggered a reboot.
oh yeah,
I'm tired of waiting on you. I'm just going to reboot, because you can look and see if so if you're waiting on node reboots to happen, that's usually the longest part because it will go into a cordon and drain of each node. That's another thing that you can use to kind of speed up that process. Is usually the longest part, particularly with virtual machines, the longest part of that is just waiting for the workload to drain. So if you know that your application is tolerant of it, knock on wood, yeah, forcefully reboot it. And that I do that in my lab. I get tired of waiting for things to drain and do it. In production, maybe wait for it to drain, or talk to the developers, talk to the app team and say, hey, can you do this, figure out what's happening here, why this is taking so long, and fix your application type of thing. Yeah, and VMs reboot so fast that's usually a pretty minor part of the whole thing.
oh yeah.
Yeah, so you can, if you're waiting on that, so the way that you see that is look for the node that has been, cordoned, it's marked as non-schedulable, but hasn't rebooted yet. And you can basically go and look specifically at the pods. I usually just do a simple grep, OC get pods -o wide and grep on the node name, and just look for the ones that are in terminating status and see why they're hung.
Yep. I do OC get pods -a as well. And I'll parse for like pending or terminating or something like that, just so I can kind of get an idea of like what's what.
Yeah. So yeah, the last thing that I wanted to talk about here is something that we brought up. I say the last thing. There are some other things that I'll include in the blog post. But the last thing I wanted to mention here is we first talked about this during the last What's Next. So What's Next is the roadmap presentation that gets streamed. And you heard the PM team talk about what we're calling targeted edge blocking. So basically what that means is historically, if any deployment type, any feature function capability on any platform qualifies as an upgrade blocking or as an upgrade blocker, we block that upgrade for everyone. So maybe it's something that is specific to only vSphere deployments. Well, if you're deployed to Azure, AWS, or anywhere else, we're still blocked. So what they're working on is effectively making that more granular so that you can see, oh, I'm not using vSphere. I can go ahead and update my cluster. And I think, don't hold me to it, that you can still, or even after that, you'll still be able to say, oh, I see it's vSphere, but it's a vSphere thing that doesn't affect me. So I still want to, trigger that update. It's something that only affects, say, vSphere 6.7, but I'm on 7.0, so I'm okay. I want to force that upgrade. You can technically force that upgrade at any time, but it will give you better metadata, better information out of the tooling to let you know when that's the case. Let's see. Any other stuff in chat, Johnny?
No, I think we got it. It was Amit
Okay.
was thanking us for answering the questions.
Okay.
So I was just telling him if there's any questions, if he's got any more, just reach out to us.
Make sure you don't have any error states before you start. Yes, that is true. RHOPE 9. We started, when did that start? It was 4.8 or 4.9. It won't do an update if any of the machine pools are in a non-healthy status. So if the machine pool is degraded for any reason, it will basically stop an upgrade from happening. So did we share the, Johnny, can you share your screen? Can you show the upgrade path tool?
Yep, let me pull it up and I'll share it.
So I know we've shown this a number of times. I always like to remind folks of this, just as it's a really handy tool to have available. So it shows you, basically you go in and say, I'm using this version and I want to go to this version, and it will show you the exact path that you take. And it will even provide the commands that you can use to do that upgrade. So I always like to remind people that it's out there, because it can be confusing, right? I'm on 4.7 something today. How do I get to 4.9 whatever the latest is? However, do note that sometimes you'll see some weird scenarios. So, for example, if you were to look at it, might have finally the upgrade edge might finally be there. But if you go to so are you on stable 4.8?
Yep.
So switch over to the update path view. And then, so let's say we're on current channel is, we'll call it stable 4.8, and the current version is 4.8.30, I think, 30 or 40.
24.
Okay. So sometimes what happens, and we can't, strangely, you must be on Fedora. It's not showing the drop downs in the share.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, I have that issue when I do screen recordings on Fedora. Anyways, so sometimes what happens is you will end up with a Z stream for an earlier version that is, from a CoreOS perspective, ahead of the Z stream from a later Y release. So for a while, and I think it was 4.7. So 4.7.40 was the current Z stream release with 4.7, but it had no upgrade paths to 4.8. And the reason for that was because whatever CoreOS version was in 4.7.40 was newer than whatever the current stable release in 4.8 was. So let's say it was 4.8.23. I'm just making that up. I don't know what it actually was. So, when you looked, it would say, if you're currently on 4.7.40, you have no upgrade path. And essentially the solution to that is to just wait if you want to stick to stable channels. And wait for, say it was 4.8.24 to match or be ahead. Wait for that one to get promoted, and then you would be able to do that update. Or if you are comfortable, you can use the fast channel. So we've talked about it before. The fast channel is fully supported. When a release is in the fast channel, it is generally available. It is fully supported. You can pick up the phone. You can call support. You can absolutely get help with that. So if you go to fast, so let's say the scenario I was just describing is true. You went to 4.7.40 for whatever reason. Oh no, I need to go to 4.8.24 right now. It's only in fast. That is a fully supported GA release. You can go there in a week or two or however long. When 4.8.24 then moves from fast into stable, you can then switch your channel back to stable, and then you can stick with the stable releases from there on out. And that doesn't change support status. That doesn't invalidate your support or anything like that. Candidate releases are unsupported, but you can. And we had this question come up not too long ago of, my customer didn't realize it. They had selected the candidate channel, and then they updated to the very latest release. And, what do they do now? And it was one of those, well, hopefully that release gets promoted to fast, and then they can, then they'll be supported because it's at that point a GA release. If not, so let's say it was, I'm going to use fictitious numbers. So they were on candidate, they went to 4.9.78, and that one never made it into fast and never got promoted to GA. But 4.9.79 got released. So in candidate channel, update to 4.9.79, and then switch to fast channel, which has with 4.8.79. And then you would stick with it, type of thing. So for production environment, we must be at N-1 or N-2. Which do you think is always stable? So when you say N-1 or N-2, Ashish, are you referring to Y releases or Z releases? So do you mean so if N is 4.9, N-1 would be 4.8, N-2 equals 4.7, or is N 4.9.12, I think is the stable right now. So N-2 would be 4.9.11 or for N-1. Yeah. Arithmetic in public is hard.
Math.
Yeah. So I would say, and it's going to be very subjective. The releases are standalone, always intended, and should always be stable. Usually the biggest concern is, what are the changes that happened going from one release to the next? The longer that a release has been out there, the more and the better awareness there is around what those things are. This is a big thing with the 4.8 to 4.9 release. It's not that 4.9 was unstable. There's been no, as far as I know, no stability issues, with 4.9. Rather, there was a lot of API changes, so it caused some issues for folks with their applications of, I was using this API, that API is now gone. So what do I do? It triggered an outage, or I don't know if that is possible, but it caused some issues in that respect. So that would be I realize that's kind of a non-answer, or maybe it sounds like I'm towing the company line of, oh no, everything's always great, there's never any issues, which isn't true. But generally speaking, each release is intended to be equally stable as all of the others. So it really comes down to certain things. That being said, most of the time, so as far as I know, security updates and all that other stuff are always backported.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes feature, fixes, you have to go forward to get those. So it may be like, hey, I'm using, I don't know, Andrew's operator. And Andrew's operator on 4.8 is no longer being, no longer adding features or not fixing things anymore. I need to go to 4.9 so that I can resume those updates. So the layered thing can sometimes be an issue. Any thoughts there?
No, I think that, yeah, you nailed it. Like, it comes down to just what do you need, and like especially on the Y streams, if there's a feature coming out that you need, obviously upgrade to it. If there's something breaking, like an API extension that's being deprecated, obviously don't upgrade. But it's good to read the release notes. It's good to stay up to date with like what's coming out in the cluster, because
Absolutely,
with every release, we're going with a new version of Kubernetes as well. So, like they're going to be deprecating things upstream, and we're going to have to do the same. So it's something that you just, we just have to keep track of.
Well, I don't know if you heard that, but that was my doorbell, which means that my timer has expired. So thank you everybody for joining us this week. We really do appreciate you attending. I know it's been a little while since we had a stream, so thank you very much to our audience. Really love your interactivity today. Really love the questions. Please don't hesitate to follow up. Stephanie, thank you for flashing our contact information. You can always reach me via email at any time, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. And then keep an eye out for those post-stream vlogs. They usually come out the same week, sometimes the week after, but we're getting all of those taken care of. So thank you again, Johnny. Really good to see you. Stephanie, thank you for all your help on the back end, and have a great and safe week, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, Stephanie.